This wasn't football. This was something else entirely. This was war. And in Stoke-on-Trent, a name rose from the smoke and blood, the Naughty Forty. A firm that didn't just fight, they hunted, feared on terraces, known in courtrooms, watched by police. This is the story of a gang born on an away day that became one of the most violent in English football history. This is the brutal history of Stoke's Naughty Forty. Chapter 1. Born in Violence. The year was 1985. Stoke City were away at Portsmouth. The football match itself was routine, nothing remarkable on the pitch. But outside the stadium, events unfolded that would define a new era. A group of approximately 40 Stoke City supporters engaged in a violent confrontation with around 80 Portsmouth fans. Outnumbered, but not overwhelmed, the Stoke group held their ground and came out on top. That fight wasn't just a one-off incident, it was a statement. From that day, they carried a name that would become feared across the country, the Naughty Forty. This was not an official organization. There were no ranks or leaders. It was a loose, tightly connected firm that operated on loyalty, aggression, and territorial dominance. Their reputation began spreading quickly, especially as violence around football was reaching its peak across the UK. But while the name Naughty Forty was coined in 1985, the roots of Stoke's football violence stretched back far earlier. Through a decade of unrest, failed invasions, and hard lessons. Chapter 2. Before the name. Long before the Naughty Forty had a name, Stoke's terraces were already boiling. The 1970s were the age of chaos, a time when football violence wasn't fringe. It was expected. And Stoke City? They were in the thick of it. It began with humiliation. 1970, Stoke versus Manchester United. United's Red Army rolled into town and took the Bootham End, Stoke's home turf. Thousands of away fans marched in, sparking violent clashes before, during, and after the match. For the Stoke lads, it wasn't just a defeat, it was a public embarrassment. Then came the revenge attempts. 1970, Stoke versus Leeds. Leeds brought 800 skinheads trying to take the end. But this time, Stoke didn't back down. As the Leeds mob surged forward, the Stoke crowd surged back harder, forcing them into a corner. The crush left 61 fans injured. It was blood, bricks, and boots, and it set the tone for what Stoke's fans would become. 1974, Leeds versus Stoke. At Elland Road, Stoke fans were battered. Leeds supporters invaded the away section, handing out a brutal beating. No police, no backup, just fists and fear. That lesson stayed with Stoke. They would never again let themselves be caught off guard. Throughout the late 70s, Stoke were on a warpath, fighting everyone and anyone. 1976, Spurs brought 2,000, including 50 black lads trying to take the Bootham End. It ended in disorder throughout the game and beyond. This wasn't just about club pride anymore, it was about survival, defending your turf, your mates, your name. And slowly, a pattern formed. Stoke lads weren't just reacting to violence, they were learning how to create it. By the early 80s, they had the tactics, they had the numbers. All they needed now was an identity. Chapter 3. N40 Rule the Roads. By the mid-80s, the Naughty Forty weren't just a name whispered in pubs. They were a name shouted in courtrooms, plastered across headlines, and tracked by police. What started as 40 lads on an away day became a network of hundreds. At their peak, the Naughty Forty were estimated to have over 700 active members. Their specialty? Ambushes, surprise, brutality. They didn't just clash in stadiums, but they struck in service stations, train platforms, and pub car parks. And when they struck, they left a mark. Birmingham, 1991. 5,000 Stoke fans on enemy turf? A match at St. Andrews turned into all-out warfare. Blues fans invaded the pitch. Police were injured. Even the referee was caught in the chaos. Only 15 arrests were made. The rest escaped into the crowd. From Swansea to Spurs, from Blackpool to Bristol, the Naughty Forty went everywhere with one mission: take your end or break your firm. They weren't the biggest in numbers, they didn't always win, but when they showed up, no one left untouched. But when you gain that much attention, someone's going to notice. And for the Naughty Forty, the police were ready to go to war. Chapter 4. Crackdown. By the late 1990s, the Naughty Forty weren't just a firm, they were a target. Police intelligence units, undercover officers, and surveillance teams were all closing in. What used to be street fights were now full-scale operations. They called it a zero-tolerance approach, and Stoke was on the list. 1998, Britannia Stadium Meltdown. A cold January day, Stoke are thrashed 7-0 by Birmingham City. As the final whistle blows, the anger erupts. Dozens of fans invade the pitch. Seats are ripped out and thrown. flares light the sky. This wasn't just a loss, it was a breakdown. It became one of the darkest moments in Stoke's modern history, and one of the loudest alarms for law enforcement. 2001, Huddersfield Town. Stoke's firm wasn't slowing down. A pub called the White Hart smashed up, then set on fire. Firefighters called it deliberate. Police called it planned. Locals just called it terror. 2001, Oldham race riot. What started as fan clashes turned into something darker. Stoke fans marched through multi-racial neighborhoods taunting. Locals, including Bangladeshi youth groups, fought back. Petrol bombs flew. The streets were burning. It was no longer just football. It was social chaos. This was a different battlefield. No terraces, no songs. Just CCTV and riot vans. The Naughty 40 were now living in the age of surveillance. And getting caught more often. Thousands of hours of footage. Dozens of banning orders. And finally, real jail time. But even then, it wasn't over. 2002, Cardiff Clashes, home and away. Police launched Operation Aerial, a cross-force campaign to control hooligans. Over 1,000 officers were deployed, but it still wasn't enough. Fights broke out inside the stadium, in the streets, at the team hotel. Fence posts and bottles rained down on police. Even Cardiff's chairman had his car smashed up. The Naughty 40 had become a ghost in the machine. Tracked, arrested, banned, and still fighting. But even ghosts can leave scars, and in the years to come, the Naughty 40's name would continue, even in silence. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. The Naughty 40 were no longer the young, wild mob of the 80s. The stadiums had changed. The CCTV had eyes everywhere. Football firms had gone quiet, but they hadn't disappeared. 2018, Port Vale versus Stoke. It was meant to be nothing, a low-profile checker trade trophy match. Stoke's under-21s playing local rivals Port Vale. But inside the ground and on the streets, it exploded. Fireworks, coins, seats ripped out and thrown. Riot police surrounded the stadium. Over 150 officers were needed to contain the chaos. Even in a new era, the old names still cast shadows. In 2019 to 2020, Stoke City fans received the most football banning orders in the entire country. More than Millwall, more than Leeds. The Naughty 40 were no longer marching in groups of 200, but their legacy was alive. In every away day, every postcode, every watch list. What happened to the Naughty 40? Some walked away, some were arrested, some wrote books, telling their side of the violence. Others stayed in the game, just quieter, smarter, harder to catch. The youth firm, still around, known as the Under Fives, or UFAS, short for Under F's Action Service. They're not as wild, they're not as big, but they still exist in the cracks, under the radar. The Naughty 40 weren't the most famous, they weren't the most organized, but they were one of the most feared. They built a name in blood and fear, and they carved it into English football history. This was the Naughty 40.